Obviously, Nathan, you spent 6 years at Liverpool. Obviously, I just want to take it back to the start and kind of, you're 15, 16-year-old, you're playing at Bury in the youth team, and you get the call that Liverpool are interested in you. How is that as a young, footballer trying to make your moves in the game? How do you react to the news that a team as big as Liverpool are interested in you?
As you can imagine, being a 15-year-old lad from Manchester, and Liverpool are the ones that are calling you. It comes as a bit of a surprise initially, and then the overwhelming feeling of like Liverpool are interested in taking a look at me and wanting me to come down and trial. I literally just started crying. Definitely, complete transparency. I just started crying because I knew what a great opportunity it could be for a lad like myself to go and present my skills to a club like Liverpool. So yeah, I was just buzzing. I actually remember I come home from school, and my dad called my mum initially, but I wasn't home at the time, and then he called me back just to say that one of the scouts at Bury had contacted him saying that Liverpool are interested in taking a look at me, and I just started crying. So yeah, I was buzzing.
And obviously, you touch on you're a lad from Manchester. I take it Liverpool weren't your chosen team to support. Were you a United fan growing up then?
When I was a kid, yeah, because I'm from North Manchester, and the area that I'm actually from is Newton Heath, and United's history, they used to be called Newton Heath United. That's where the name actually stems from. So yeah, all of my family was United supporters, but obviously because I used to play football, I was just a footballing fan anyway. So teams such as Liverpool, Arsenal, Manchester United, they was all teams that I followed anyway. My allegiance at the time was obviously with United because my parents supported those, but was always fans of Liverpool. And I think that year, that summer actually, they just won the Champions League. And whether you was a diehard Man United fan or not, seeing what Liverpool did in the Champions League in Istanbul, any supporter in the world of football was a Liverpool fan because it was so historic. And yeah, that was pretty much how it went.
And obviously, you talk on that you started kind of your playing days at Bury. How did that go then? Obviously, to earn the move to Liverpool, obviously you've got to be pulling up serious trees in the youth team standing out. Was it a smooth kind of transition through the age groups? Were you always kind of the standout player, the top goal scorer, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think from the ages of 8, even playing locally for my local team, I was always playing like a year or a couple of years above. And at the time, I was pretty small, skillful and quick. So I was always one scoring the goals. And then at Bury was pretty much the same thing. When I was at Bury, I was always playing a year above myself, and I was always like top goal scorer. And obviously being at a centre of excellence, playing the likes of Oldham and Rochdale, teams like that, I was always pretty prolific in like at that level, I'd guess. And I think it attracted like interest from quite a lot of teams that come and kind of take players from centre of excellence that are like exceeding their expectation or that particular level. And yeah, I guess playing at that level put me in good stead for other teams such as Liverpool and teams like that.
And so obviously you make the move to Liverpool and you work your way, through the ranks, the 18s, the 23s, and about 2009, you kind of get your first kind of looking at the first team. I was doing looking kind of through the archives earlier, and there's a great photo of you. I think it's the start of the 2009 season. And you've got the Carlsberg shirt on. It's probably 3 sizes too big. The start of the season photo. How was that then as a young kind of guy going into the dressing room? You've got the likes of Torres, Gerrard, Alonso. You probably would have crossed paths with him. Was it an intimidating thing, or was it were they kind of welcoming, or what was that environment like?
I actually remember that shirt specifically. I had no trim as well, which makes it even worse. But yeah, I feel like just even if like a little bit before that, just leaving Bury to go to Liverpool, going down to the academy in Kirby was like, for a player like me at Bury, we had to like wash our own kits. We had to like go and set up all the goalposts and stuff like that on a match day. We was literally getting changed in like a cabin, which was disgusting. And then coming into the academy and seeing they had their own, like under 15s, they had their own kit man, a couple of coaches, just a whole setup. It was just like really encouraging for somebody like me because I'd never had that before. So I thought that was amazing, and that I generally felt at the time I had more of a hunger than the players that had been there probably from a younger age because that's all they've known. Whereas me, I was hungry. So when I came in and noticed, I guess some people potentially may have been a little bit complacent. I went, I guess, that extra mile, and yeah, going up through the ranks. I actually remember the first 4 games of my under 18s. They brought in a couple of players from abroad, a German lad and a lad from London. And up until that point, on the 15s and 16s, I was the star player. And then I had to fight for my position. And that's what I did. And then, yeah, I kind of excelled and then probably never looked back. So then when I did get into the first team, it was, well, not get into the first team, but when I was probably training, the initial first few times, I didn't actually train with the first team. I just travelled. I remember travelling to Arsenal. I played a reserve game on a Thursday. And then I got a phone call on Friday from Sammy Lee to say that I'll be travelling with the squad that Friday.
Was that the League Cup game, was it?
That was the League Cup game, yeah. Actually, I may have got my days mixed up. Maybe that was a weekday game. But yeah, similar thing. Like I hadn't trained with the first team. I just travelled with the coach, with the players on the coach, and I think that time was the train. And there was a couple of younger players that I'd known, like Martin Kelly and Jay Spearing. So I kind of just stuck with them. And then the senior players, like you mentioned, for example, Mascherano and Carragher and those guys, it was kind of just in awe of them. I'd say hello, but very quietly and just keep it moving. And then, yeah, it probably wasn't until the summer that Roy Hodgson came. I did pre-season with the team, and that's when I fully integrated, I guess. But yeah, up until then, it was pretty daunting, as any 17, 18-year-old could imagine walking into a dressing room full of superstars.
And just on a day-to-day basis, kind of the back end of Benitez's days, obviously, as you were kind of training here and there, what was the standard? Was it just another level? Is that, people do talk about the jump from, 18s to 23s and then going again from 23s to seniors. Was the gap in quality, or even kind of just how quick everything's done, was it bigger than you expected?
Oh yeah, you can see a significant difference. It was kind of like the ping pong effect, where like one touch, two touch, and like before you leave, I used to always remember like the players like Gerrard and Alonso. As soon as you would move, especially as a striker, as soon as you would move, they would see it, and the ball would pretty much already be there. And then just the pace of the passing was like a lot higher, for example. And it kind of always worked in different parts. That there'd be a build up from the back, and as soon as it got into like the latter third, things quickened up. That's when you'd have to be sharp and sharp. So there was a distinctive difference in skill set, obviously, training tempo, and then I just think from overall game management, like from under 18s and under 21s, it's something that inexperience in games, seeing games out, or how to manage games and get back into games, is something that probably only comes with time. And just even in training, you could tell the difference, the level of coaching. Like you said about Benitez, he was very specific and I guess methodical with his way of training, I'd say. And just as a youngster, just learning from coaches such as that with a wealth of experience was just really good.
And obviously you touch on Benitez there, and that's something I did want to ask you. Obviously, I think, something that sticks out kind of as my time supporting Liverpool is, you hear the likes of Gerrard, who said he's probably the best tactical coach he's worked under. His attention to detail, his kind of obsession with the game, the small margins. But the flip side of that is he said that he was a very cold personality, as in probably the worst man manager he had during his career. If you compare him to someone like, Brendan Rodgers or other managers Stevie played under. So was that something you experienced, or what was he kind of like as a youngster? You know, would he pull you aside and make you feel welcome, or was that left to like the likes of Carragher and Gerrard, and or kind of your own way to kind of make you settle in a team?
I would agree with that. Yeah, I would say. And again, who am I to critique his man management? Well, if it's coming from the likes of Steven Gerrard, then I guess I could also be in agreement with him in terms of he was pretty methodical in his approach to coaching, and those small margins was quite effective. Me as a youngster coming up, I would barely say a few words to him. I remember coming on both at Fulham and Arsenal, and he just said, "Go and enjoy yourself," which I felt was encouraging for me personally. But in terms of like being around the place, it would be brief conversations. How are you today? Go out and enjoy yourself. So maybe it was a little bit different for me because I was a youngster. So I can't imagine them being that much of a conversation to be had. Obviously, those players was a lot more senior. But like you did mention about Brendan Rodgers and Roy Hodgson, I feel like their man management was amazing for me. They really made me feel welcome and understood. I kind of felt like they put their arm around me a little bit, whereas I feel like with Benitez, it was kind of like you're with the big boys now, and it was left to the likes of Stevie and Kyra to like, I guess, welcome you. And again, obviously they're local lads, English. I think that helped too, because at the time there was a lot of like South American or Spanish culture at the time. Even in the reserves, there was like Spanish managers. So I think if you was a Spanish player at that time under Benitez, you might have been made to feel a little bit more welcome, maybe. So yeah, it was down to the more senior players, I guess, which they would do anyway, because that's the type of people that they are. They would always make the young players coming through the academy feel welcome, and everybody else, of course. But obviously, they've walked in those footsteps too, so they know what it's like to come and train with the first team, etc.
And obviously, Benitez's time at Liverpool kind of came to an end in the summer of 2010. And obviously, you touched on then Roy Hodgson comes through the door. As a young player, then who's been given his kind of pathway into the first team by Benitez, how does a managerial change so early in kind of your involvement with the first team impact you? Because is it almost like I've got to prove to another manager now that I deserve to stay here, or is it right a fresh kind of a fresh slate? You know, I can kick on here even more kind of thing.
I think something that all players, not even just youngsters, but all players imagine when they're coming into under new management. It's like, okay, well, whatever happened before is in the past, and you've got a new opportunity. For me, I always looked at it like, okay, any bias towards players that previous managers had brought in, and they probably felt like they needed to play to justify the spend, or even certain salaries that certain players was earning. For me, it was a great opportunity to say, well, if you remove the star name and you just base us all on our work ethic and how we apply ourselves, it's a great opportunity. And Roy Hodgson certainly did that for me. I remember coming back from my loan, I think it was, and then he brought a couple of youngsters up for pre-season, which a lot of managers typically do. And I just grafted really hard, and I think we was in Switzerland, and I did really well. And he just said to me, like, you're going to be staying with us for the remainder of the season, and I'll be training full time at Melwood with the actual first team. So for me, it was amazing to be given that opportunity. And I remember specifically, I think I played like seven times under Roy, and he was that manager. Like if you was working hard in training and you was applying yourself, it'd give you the opportunity. And on a couple of occasions, he played me ahead of some really senior players, some international players, and I was always really grateful for that, because it gives you a fair crack at the wheel, and then it was down for you to go and express yourself. So I was always grateful for him. And I think throughout his managerial career, he's gone on to other clubs and he's done the exact same thing. But yeah, I was grateful that he didn't have a bias towards senior players that probably wasn't really pulling away or whatever. And he was like, okay, cool, I'll give this player opportunity. And that's why I think, obviously, his time at Liverpool, probably, I don't know, up and down, I'd say. But yeah, for me as a player, I appreciated that he picked players on the attitude and how willing he was to perform.
And you obviously just touched on it there. His time at Anfield was pretty short lived, and obviously wasn't something wasn't an era that Liverpool fans will look on back at too fondly. One game that kind of looking back at it now, obviously is the infamous game against Northampton in the League Cup. That's a game that I think many people now kind of think like foreshadowed what was to come under Hodgson. There was some pretty bad occasions. What are your memories of the Northampton game? Obviously, you missed a penalty in the shootout, didn't you? The penultimate pen. How was that? First of all, playing at Anfield, in front of a decent crowd, but then obviously like the low of kind of missing that penalty all on the same night.
Yeah, as you can imagine, that's a distinctive memory in my life, and I remember that game, and he picked the starting 11, and the starting 11 had some really senior players. And no offense to Northampton, it's a team that we should have been beating quite comfortably. And I was kind of, again, as a youngster, I was hoping that I would come on and we could be a couple of goals up, and then I could go and quote unquote have fun. That wasn't to be the case. And I remember, I think it was me and John Joe came on as substitutes in that game, and like we actually did really well. And we went into extra time. And for our extra time as a youngster, I was performing really well. I was attacking. I was confident. I felt great. And then yeah, when it comes to the penalty, I was one of the players to step up. Again, it was more senior players than me at the time, but I was always the penalty taker for the reserves at the time. I was always confident in taking penalties. And I did my usual stutter, and yeah, it hit the crossbar at the Kop. And there was like a picture that I remember. The rain was lashing down, and I've just put my hands like over my face, kind of thing. And I just remember like the Kop like singing my name, so to speak, just as an encouragement. And I've always said, and I said this at 15, going to my very first Liverpool game, again being a Manchester-born person, that Liverpool fans have the best fans in the world. And I just thought at that moment, like the reality kicked in. I just missed a penalty then. I think somebody else missed a penalty after me. And then yeah, we was out. And I just remember afterwards, like just being heartbroken in the tunnel. And Sammy Lee just come up to me and just said, "Get your effing head up." Do you know what I mean? You had the guts to take a penalty, and you did really well. And I think Stevie come in and said the same thing, saying, "Listen, we've all been there, and even the best of players miss penalties, and you'll bounce back." And I just remember going home. I lived in Sefton Park at the time. I drove home by myself, and obviously I was distraught. I was upset, and I went into training the next day. And for me, the senior players and staff made me feel so assured that, listen, you didn't do anything wrong, type of thing. Just kind of like, it shouldn't have been left in your hands anyway. And it showed what type of character I was to step up. So for me, I kind of got confidence from that. And again, yeah, I'm not sure if Napoli was before or after that game. But I think games after that, I was confident, because the guys was like, listen, everybody does it. So for me, it was like, okay, it was a learning curve. I was young, and I just took it as a learning curve, and it didn't really deter me from wanting to take chances again. But yeah, as a football club, it was horrific to be knocked out of a cup by Northampton. Like a club of the stature of Liverpool shouldn't be getting beat by Northampton at home. But the whole experience of playing at Anfield in front of the Kop, again, I'm 31 now, it's an experience I'll never forget. Good or bad, I take the positives and the negatives from that game.
So do you think that almost, it sounds strange, but do you think that almost benefited you, because you thought from then on you probably had nothing to lose, in the sense of like, it can't get worse than this, but quote unquote kind of thing of like, well, it can only get better. It's the only ways up kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely. Like I said at the time, I thought my world was over. Because again, no matter of your age, you got to take accountability. I was a professional footballer, albeit being a youngster in the team, and that loss was difficult to take. But for me, the type of person I was, it just drove me to want to do better and probably, I guess, not prove anybody right or wrong, just try and do better in the next game. And again, I was a centre forward, so it was my responsibility to take chances and do things that others are probably not prepared to do. And again, the support from the football club was amazing, from the academy staff straight through to the first team staff and the players. So for me, it was just like, yeah, it can only go up from here. And again, I feel like regarding the senior players and the staff, it kind of made them look at me in a different way in terms of like, this youngster's like got a bit about him. He stepped up and he wanted to take the penalty. Because I feel like the other players that played in that team, not to mention any names, when they didn't step up, that actually went against them. And in those moments, that career-defining moments for everybody, but you can't ever take that back from somebody. Like if a player or a coach sees that somebody kind of bottles it, you can't actually go back. So for me, it was actually a positive.
And obviously, you talked about some of the more senior players in the squad that night, not stepping up to take a penalty. Was that just ad hoc on the night that you would take one? Like, obviously, I imagine you practice penalties in the kind of days leading up to it. Was it just a case of people saying, actually, I don't fancy it, and you going, you know what, I'm here now, I'll do it, kind of thing, or was it a prearranged order?
No, it was. I think people. I'm not even sure if we did practice penalties prior to it. I don't think anybody ever imagined it going to penalties, to be honest with you. And if we did, people practiced the day before. But when it comes down to it on a night and the lights are out, it's one of those ones like, who's really up for it? And I put my name forward straight away. I said I want to take one. And the manager gave me the nod to say, yeah, you can take one. And then, yeah, other players didn't. And again, for me as a youngster, it was quite surprising because, I don't know, I guess when you're young, you don't really have a fear element. It's just like, for me, I looked at it as like, I have an opportunity to take a penalty kick at Anfield in front of the Kop end. And that's exactly how I looked at it. And I think given an opportunity, the million kids around the world, given that opportunity, whether you score or you miss, ideally I want it to go in. They would have stepped up, and I kind of always remembered like my roots of like, you have an opportunity to, first and foremost, put on the red of Liverpool, and in that particular instance, take a penalty in a famous cup competition. So for me, yeah, but the other guys, yeah, it's something that it's easy to do, in it, to not really step up, and then you can kind of pass the responsibility. Again, people will look back and probably not remember the names of the people that didn't take the penalties, but the ones that took the penalties and the ones that missed. So I guess that's life.
And so going into kind of early 2011, obviously you played a few Europa League games. You're getting minutes for Liverpool. You're playing at Anfield, and then obviously there's another managerial change. Obviously Roy goes and Kenny comes in. Obviously you're quite complimentary in how you speak of Roy and kind of what he did for you and kind of what the impact he had on your career. Is that something that you think was shared with a lot of the younger players at the time? Obviously, because we only see from the outside, kind of the results on, what was like I say, not a very memorable kind of time to be associated as like a Liverpool fan. But obviously, kind of internally, as someone who was trying to, earn stripes at the club, obviously, was Roy kind of pretty instrumental in that?
100%. Yeah, I think if you look at a lot of teams throughout football in history, when a club is going through like a bit of a transition, which Liverpool was at that time, and it was kind of like getting rid of the old and bringing in the new, there's always an opportunity for youngsters to come through. And I think at the time, like I was playing quite frequently. John Joe just signed from Charlton. He was playing frequently. I think Jordan had just signed as well. Jay Spearing was playing. Martin Kelly broke through. Um, so we was given an opportunity, as I said, because sometimes in a lot of like bigger clubs, it's difficult for youngsters to break through. Not because they're not talented, it's just because of back then the wealth of experience that was ahead. And again, as a corporation, how do you justify spending 50 million on a player and you're not playing that player and you're playing an academy graduate? It just, again, I guess from a manager's point of view, you have to justify that spend. So I think for the likes of us, it was a great opportunity, which I think we kind of took. So for me, and being under Roy was a great opportunity. And I know when Kenny came in, he did the same thing. I think I initially went out on loan initially, and then came back, and then I remember like my first couple of training sessions with the first team, and Kenny I remember him clear as day, stop him in the hallway, just saying to me like, "Why is it not really worked out for me when I've gone out on loan?" And he said, "Because you're here and you're training with superstars, and like you get it." Like, and I just said to him when I was out on loan, it's different. You know, like I said to you earlier about you run and the ball's there, or you flick it around the corner and the other person would read it. I guess that's the difference, like the IQ of footballers playing at the elite level. And again, that's no disrespect to anybody playing at a lower level. And obviously I take accountability too. I said to him, like, I guess it wasn't the right matchup going to the teams that went out on loan. But Kenny did the same thing with a couple of the youngsters. I remember Jack Robinson, I think he was called Jack Robbo, left back. Flanagan came in, right back. Raheem played a lot under Kenny, I think. There's maybe one or two others that also was given opportunity.
I think Adam Morgan came through at a similar time to you as well, didn't he?
Yeah, Morgan was there. So yeah, there was like a few of us that was given opportunities quite frequently. And again, that's what I would always appreciate about being at the club at that time. Again, as a supporter of the club, it wasn't the most successful time, of course, certainly not like it is today. But for youngsters coming through and actually being given opportunities, and again, a lot of us didn't go on to have careers and stay at Liverpool, but a lot of us went on to have careers elsewhere in the game. And I think that's the whole part of having an academy and having those facilities. Granted, you would ideally want the ones to come through, the likes of Raheem, the likes of Trent. But for a lot of others, it's just having a career in the game. And I think that's what Liverpool has helped a lot of us do.
And you touched on what Kenny said there, that you were obviously training with superstars. Like, I can reel off plenty of names that, you had the pleasure of training with and playing with. But obviously as a striker, you probably rub shoulders with, two of the best to pull on the red of Liverpool in Fernando Torres and Luis Suarez. How did those two compare? Who were you looking at and thinking, God, he's good, kind of thing? I wish I could play with him or kind of get to his level. And what was that like as a 19, 20, 21-year-old lad, playing with players of that caliber?
Honestly, it was just like playing FIFA, real life FIFA. Like, again, I think when you're a youngster, the reality doesn't kick in. And I think unless you're a really senior player, I think that reality initially of like, oh, I'm actually a footballer and I'm actually training and playing with these players. I used to always go back home and think, like, even just saying hello to certain players in the changing room, or it was just crazy. And distinctively, those two players that you mentioned, like Fernando first, I remember he come to Liverpool and just lit the club alight. He was amazing. His change of pace was out of this world. Like, he only needed a yard to get past somebody. And as everybody's seen, his finishing at Liverpool was so clinical. I'd never seen anything like it. And he kind of taught me about movement in terms of being in the right position, and that you basically only need half a yard because his change of pace was like phenomenal. So I thought that was like really good. And then, yeah, when I played with Suarez, he was different in the sense of like when you seen him, you just felt wow, because he was Like Liverpool at the time had some superstars, but he was like Gerrard level of wow, like you're a million miles above everybody else. Do you know what I'm saying? Like him and Stevie, players like that, was just like, geez. And I remember, I never forget this. We was playing like a 11 aside, and the ball got played down like the byline. And I think at the time Reina was the goalkeeper, and he was literally on the touchline at the edge of the box, and it was almost an impossible angle. And he's kind of flicked it with the outside of his boot. It shouldn't have gone in, basically, and it's gone in. And I'm not joking. The whole that training ground was just stopped and just started clapping, and I was just thinking, wow, how did that even go in? It was kind of like on FIFA, you know, when it's like a technical error and the ball somehow goes in, or it was just weird. It was just like a weird moment in the training session. But he was just, and the craziest thing, he was like so obviously passionate and like driven, but it just always looked like it was so easy for him. Like he was just having fun. Like you go to the park and have fun with your friends, and like it just everything just seemed so easy to him. I feel like he was like a really natural footballer, and I feel like that also comes from like being South American and playing street football over there. They play with a certain level of freedom, I guess. So yeah, there was both exceptional talents and world-class strikers, evidently. But as a youngster playing with the likes of those and thinking, geez, I'm way off it here. But it's if I could pick up little things from them, I would. Like Suarez's aggression. He was a striker, but he's very aggressive. And then Torres as well, in his own way, he was aggressive, never liked to get beat. And that type of winning mentality was also great, aside from their skill set.
I'm kind of, what were they like as people? I remember last year I listened to a podcast with Jordan Henderson, and he said that, you know, he kind of exploded. I think this was a couple of years later. He kind of exploded at Suarez because, you know, Henderson wasn't enjoying having the better time, and he'd given the ball away, you know, one too many times by Suarez's standards in training, and Suarez kind of, you know, told him, you know, what he thought of it, and I think Henderson had a bite back at him. So, like, as a young player, you know, maybe prone to making mistakes, or, you know, maybe your confidence isn't there, or obviously, you know, sometimes you're not up to that kind of that skill level. What was he like? Was he, you know, did you ever feel that kind of pressure from him, or was he very like welcoming? Or
yeah, I think the difference between both of those players, not to keep on comparing, but I think with Fernando, he was very encouraging. He was like, I think he assessed that, okay, you're a young player, and you're trying, type of thing. So the mistakes you could potentially get away with, and I think with Suarez, for me personally, I'm not sure if it was because he was young or not. I think he just demanded such high levels of quality from everybody, himself first and foremost. And there was no real exceptions from anybody else, regardless of age. It was kind of like that old school mentality of like, if you're good enough, you're old enough. And I think that's the impression I got from him. He was never one to like critique me specifically just because I was younger. I think he held everybody in the same high regard. And I remember, me listening to, I'm not sure if it was Carragher or Gerrard saying that one of the very first training sessions, he's gone right through somebody. Do you know what I mean? And he's like, he's not cared who they was. He's just like, I'm here now. And I think that was his mentality. So I never took that personal if he was to ever critique me. There was senior players that would kind of dig out youngsters in particular. And for me, even back then being a youngster, I just thought he was a bit of a coward, because it was like, you wouldn't speak to a senior player like that. And I guess my confidence at the time, I was just like, I don't care. From players like that, because I knew they don't hold themselves accountable anyway, and they're kind of deflecting onto youngsters. Senior players never did that. They held everybody in the same regard, and they certainly wouldn't pick out youngsters. It wasn't in their character. So for players that did do that, I never really fully respected anyway. And I don't think if Suarez ever did do that to me, it wasn't a case of, oh, well, it's because you're young. I think it's just because he was just a winner.
yeah. And so your first time training with Suarez would have been 2012, wouldn't it? If would it have been when you came back from loan then?
Yeah. Yeah, it
And
would.
so
Yeah.
that would have been under a fourth. That would have been under Rodgers, wouldn't it? He would have just been appointed. And that this is kind of a period of time in the club that I'd like really interested about. So obviously Rodgers comes in and he's kind of an unproven British manager, but obviously people have seen what he's done at Swansea. He's relatively young to take a top job. And obviously the club go on a pre-season tour to Boston, I think it was, and the Being Liverpool documentary is filmed, starting from that pre-season, obviously over the course of that kind of first couple of months. As a player, and again as a young player, it might be hard to kind of sanction a view on it because you might not have known much different. But what is, I mean, now obviously these Fly on the Wall documentaries are obviously quite common and they're quite popular. But Liverpool did that 10 years ago, and at the time it was very putting their neck on the line. What were your thoughts on that, and all of the other players' thoughts? Was the discussions in the dressing room about it?
Yeah, I remember like LFC TV when they first started and they started documenting our under-18s games. I think it was only a couple of clubs that was doing it that was big enough. Liverpool and Man United, they was the only ones. And then when we went on that pre-season tour, and it was being documented. Again, I think as a youngster, you kind of just go with what is happening. We don't really have a say so. I think for the senior players, like the ones that potentially might have been moving on, the ones that they've probably not had a great season the year before, giving that kind of insight is great for fans, but there's obviously internal issues that happen. And I remember quite specifically on that trip, the incident with Raheem, when we was all like in training and Brendan says what he says to him. And again, normally that type of thing wouldn't be documented and wouldn't necessarily come out. It'd just be an internal conversation that would have stayed pretty much between the players. So for me, it was a great experience to firstly be a part of it, and secondly, I think it gave like a great insight to like what actually does happen on a day-to-day from a training standpoint. You get to really look at the managing side of things. You get to see the players, and for me, again, I'm not sure if this was because I was young, but I just always felt it was an opportunity to express myself, because I feel like when the cameras was there, there's no hiding place, and I feel like fans have such a big influence on decisions when it comes to player selection, and I always felt like there was talented players that didn't get quite the opportunity because they was young and it was easy to just fob them off. Whereas I feel like when you had those kind of insights and like people could see like, well, this player is training well, he's making an effort, and fans want to see players that are 100% committed. And ideally, if the most talented players are not fully committed, they'd much rather have somebody in there that's going to work hard, or at least not quote unquote die for the cause, but graft. So for me, it was always a great opportunity to play and perform. And whenever the cameras came out, I used to love it. So for me, it was a great experience. For the other senior players, I think it was mixed reviews. Like I said, it was like in depth, and conversations that possibly would take place in private was there for everybody to see.
And I'm glad you touched on the point of Raheem, because that was next on my list. Is I think Raheem is probably 2 years maybe younger than you, or there's certainly a couple of years in it. So he would have probably been 17 or 18 if that on that tour of Boston at the time. Do you think like the way, like you say, it probably happens all the time, 100 times a week on training grounds up and down the country, those little incidents, but do you think that what I'm trying to say, obviously kind of Sterling, I feel like that's kind of stuck with Sterling throughout his career, that kind of, obviously people can say what they want about his attitude and whatever. And certainly towards the kind of latter stages of his time at Liverpool, his attitude and maybe the way he went about things was questioned. Do you think that was almost sparked from just that one throwaway comment because it was, nationalized on TV?
Yeah. Me personally, like at the time, knowing Raheem and knowing his character, and knowing how passionate he is and hardworking is about football. I think that that stigma has stayed with him throughout his career, and he, even to this day, he doesn't get the credit that he deserves in terms of the numbers that he's put on the board for all of his accomplishments. And yeah, at the time, it was just a throwaway comment, but it was the comment that was made to a youngster that at the football club was deemed in such high regard, and people were so hopeful of. And again, Brendan working with young players, young talented players from throughout his career at Chelsea and Swansea. Even from a managerial perspective, I'm not sure if it was a spontaneous that was done or it was more strategic, but managers and coaches over the years have been known to say certain things to get a reaction out of players and how they react to it, whether it's good or it's bad. But they like to sometimes do those things to see how players will react. And I worked with Brendan throughout that pre-season, and honestly, I felt like his man management was really good. And he was completely transparent, which you don't always get, which I really appreciated him for. And how he was with the youngsters and the senior players, I thought he was a really good man manager. And obviously, what he went on to do at Liverpool was great. It was so close to winning a title. But yeah, I think that incident with Raheem, it sent shockwaves across the country, and it was kind of like the first viral moment that had came out like that. And yeah, it was majorly impactful. And at the time, I felt it was unjust. I didn't think it was necessary because, like I said, I knew Raheem on a personal level, and there was people in and around the football club that would probably perceive him the wrong way. But I think that's just a lack of understanding. Like, culturally, things are different, and not every human is gonna act the same way. And I think in football, they try and throw like a blanket over everybody, and everybody needs to conduct themselves in the same way. And unfortunately, that's not real life. People are different. We all have our own individual preferences and personalities. And yeah, I think he's maybe misunderstood, I guess, because yeah, and as far as football is concerned, in terms of English players, he's probably been the most consistent player over the last decade. So I think that says you all you need to know about Raheem Sterling.
And obviously, touch on Rodgers' man management there. Obviously, another incident. Another thing that kind of you say was a viral moment of that kind of tour was the infamous envelope trick that Rodgers did during a team meeting, where he was, 3 players, or how many players was I going to? I've written 3 names who are going to let me down over the course of the season. Obviously, Rodgers' man management, obviously, you said, is first class. But do you think there was the decisions or things that he did that kind of showed that the job maybe came too early for him, in the sense of, like he kind of brought not criticism on himself, but the envelope trick. Like, how did that go down with the players, and how do you view that, and how do you look back at it now as someone who's kind of enjoyed a career in the game? Do you see what you're trying to do there, or is it still something that just kind of bamboozles you?
I think the more senior players had more to say on that than the youngsters. Again, as the youngsters, we kind of just went along with whatever happened. Again, being taught at academy level, on the 16s, on the 18s, and even on the 23s, it's different. There's less on the line for coaches and managers at that level, I guess. And senior players, you're dealing with international players, and you're not just from a player's perspective. You're dealing with people in general that are significantly wealthy. That also has to come into consideration too, because once you start to amass a certain amount of wealth, most people change, whether it's your professional or not. It's just natural. So I think that trick for the more senior players was questioned a lot more than the youngsters. Growing up now, I'm 31, I see what he was trying to do, and I'm not sure if that's the type of thing you do at that level and that type of club with those type of players. I don't know. I've never been in Brendan's position. I've never managed a club like Liverpool, so I don't know. But I always feel like the intent behind things. If the intent is good, that's what I would judge you on. If the intent is bad, if it was to do it to call people out or be malicious, that I shouldn't, as a human being, I wouldn't really condone or I think was cool. So yeah, I feel like the intent behind it wasn't malicious. I feel like it was kind of like subconsciously he was trying to say to people, you don't want to be one of the players that's in this envelope. And like, I guess internally trying to encourage people, motivate people to do better, basically. That's how it come across to me. It's more of a psychological thing than personal. And I'm not even sure if those names ever actually got revealed. Hopefully I wasn't in that envelope.
I've heard a few people say that there was probably no names in the envelope. They were probably, as you say, it was probably a psychological trick. 3 blank envelopes. Don't be in these envelopes. But yeah, it was certainly a questionable motivational method. But yeah, so just to kind of take it on a bit further, obviously you kind of depart the club at the end of that transfer window, so in 2012. How does that come about then? Is that something you decide you need to kind of take the next steps? Is that, does the gaffer tell you that you're going to struggle maybe to get the minutes that you kind of deserve? Is it just kind of one of those moves that an offer comes in and it just suits all parties?
Yeah, it was. And again, you talk about life-changing moments. That was certainly one of them. I remember coming into training that morning. And then throughout the day, obviously it was transfer day. I spoke to my agent, but I also spoke to Brendan as well. They just signed Fabio Barini. We was the same age. We actually played against each other when he was at Chelsea, but then he went to Swansea. Had a really good move at Swansea and then Roma, I think. Anyway, they brought in Fabio Barini and was similar age, and Brendan just said to me, listen, like, I can't guarantee you games. You'll be training with the first team, but the majority of the games are probably going to be coming with the reserves. I think at the time I was 20 or 21. I had a year left, and he just said, the decision is entirely up to you. And he referenced Scott Sinclair that had been on loan a couple of times at Chelsea, and then I think he finally made his move departure to Swansea and had a really good season. Then he got moved to Manchester City, and he just said, like, I think you're at that same stage where you've had a couple of loan moves, you've been at a big club, and if you got it right, you could be back at a big club the following season as a more permanent fixture in the starting 11, which I understood. And again, I always appreciate this transparency. So then at the time, I think I could have went on loan to Sheffield United. That was in League One for 6 months. Or I could have went to Blackpool, and then Liverpool was willing to not ask for a fee. Blackpool at the time couldn't afford my wages, and then Liverpool was able to compensate. So it just seemed like a great opportunity. They'd reached the player final the year before, and I knew that a couple of youngsters had gone there and done well. So I felt like it was a great opportunity. So I opted to go to Blackpool, literally on deadline day. And I remember Danny Pacheco was also trying to get a move as well. And what quite contrasting, 4 weeks later, Blackpool was top of the league. I couldn't get in the team. And then 4 weeks later, Danny Pacheco's move didn't go through on deadline. And then Liverpool, I think they had 3 strikers that was injured. Suarez was injured, I think, at the time. Andy Carroll was injured. And then Pacheco was playing. I think Adam Morgan was playing. And at the time, as a striker, I was ahead of both of those guys. And it was one of those, like, geez, I've come to Blackpool hoping to play. We're 10 weeks unbeaten. At Liverpool, they've surplus quite strikers. I probably wouldn't have been given an opportunity. But everything happens for a reason. And yeah, I went and was at Blackpool for 2 years.
And obviously, kind of just throughout, you're very philosophical in the way you talk, and your kind of outlook on life in terms of like no regrets and that kind of thing. And you've got a very entrepreneurial mindset, obviously, which is something we'll come into later. But so how do you look back at that, your time at Liverpool then? Is it all positives kind of thing? Like, you say it was almost a sliding doors moment. You could have been given that chance if you had stayed, but as kind of your 6 years at Liverpool, is it something you look back on, fondly and proudly, or is it a case of, what could have been kind of thing?
I think my outlook on life is as you say, is positives, and I think anything in life, everything happens for a reason. I look back at those times and think, could I have done anything more? And in life, you can always do more. It's as simple as that. And one thing that I do look back and think, Jesus, I wasn't really as present. I've always been one of those type of people to just take things in my stride. But I guess I've always been the kid from a council estate of just like, geez, I'm playing for Liverpool, and I wish I didn't have that mentality of like, oh, I'm here, and I was just happy to just be here. I wish I would have had more of a forceful mentality of like, I'm here and I'm here to stay, and I'm not just happy to get my 20 minutes game time. I wish I had more of that. I feel like that, I guess the fan of me was still in. And then I look at my efforts in like at academy level, I was always like top goal scorer. And then I feel like when I got to the first team, I feel like I always trained well. And when I come on, I always give my best. So I look back and think, well, is there much more that I could have done? Possibly not at that time. I thought that's all I could do. Again, growing up and being more of a senior player when I got older, I guess your experience of like, geez, you could have maybe done this a little bit better. I wish I would have asked more questions as well. Like, I wish I wouldn't have been as scared to ask senior players, like, what more do I need to be doing? You know, like, I wish I would have asked those questions, but I guess, again, you're a little bit, not intimidated, but you don't really want to step out of line. It's probably the wrong mentality to have. But I definitely look back at those memories at Liverpool, and they were certainly the best of my career and my life, because they shaped me to the man I am today. It's an amazing football club. Everybody that was involved throughout my time, from the first day, from the academy staff, Dave Shannon, Steve Iway, all of the players that I played with, some amazing memories. So yeah, I look back at those times and think I was so blessed and grateful. Like I said, you speak to any kid in the world and say one day you're going to have an opportunity to play for Liverpool for 2 minutes, let alone the amount of times minutes I managed to get on the pitch. For some, it could be what could have been. For me, I was like, I beat the odds. And I guess that type of positivity allows me to not live in regret, because that's ultimately a lot of people's downfall, is to live in regret of what could have been.
And obviously, you've kind of taken that mentality, obviously, into business now. Obviously, you obviously run a sportswear company. How did that come about then? Was that something that kind of like entrepreneurial side, something you always wanted to look at during football? Was it something you thought, I'll kind of do after I've started playing? But obviously, you're 31 now. You don't still play, do you? So like, how did you make that transition kind of thing and think, you know what, I'm gonna go full time into this?
I remember when I was younger, I used to always like be curious. Like, I say I should have asked more questions, but I've always been intrigued by how people do certain things. So I remember when we went on that tour actually to United States, and we was at Boston Red Sox, I think they're called. And I seen all of like like all the sponsors and stuff, and how it was definitely a lot more pushed in your face in terms of like the marketing aspect, Gatorade and all of these companies. And I was just always curious to like sponsors, and like I guess from the financial point of view, I used to always think, well, how can I afford to pay this player, I don't know, 6 figures every week, you know? And then I start to look at football as a business and say, yeah, it's a corporation, like it's listed as a corporate company. There's profits and losses like any company. This is staff turnaround, etc. And then, yeah, during that time where I left Liverpool to go to Blackpool, I actually negotiated that contract myself. And then I think from that moment, I started to look at the business side of football. I'm thinking like, okay, if you're in a position to pay me, how much money are you making? And then I think whilst I was at Blackpool, one of my friends, his friend that he grew up with was one of the founders of Gymshark. And at the time, me and my friend we had like relatively good cars for like young lads, and then those guys had like supercars, and then they was telling us that they only paid 20% in VAT. They put all of their expenses through their business, and that type of conversation I wasn't having with footballers. You know, we go to training, we play, and then we come home, and most people play computer games or Call of Duty. I'm more of a visual learner, so I would always watch documentaries. So then it just piqued my curiosity, and then I traveled to LA that summer on holiday. And
was that the
all
summer of
of
2013? Was that?
Pardon?
Was that the summer of 2013? Yeah. So a year after you'd left Liverpool, was it?
Year after I'd left Liverpool, yeah, potentially, yeah. Yeah, well, actually, it would have been 3 years after I left Liverpool, but my curiosity peaked just as I moved to Blackpool. So then, let's say, give it 2 years or so. I'd been doing research on like companies, and like e-commerce was relatively new, and like fashion brands at the time. So yeah, I went to LA on holiday, and then everybody was wearing like casual clothing in the daytime, women especially, like leggings and sports bra and caps. There wasn't like the culture in the UK at the time was like girls were still wearing jeans casually, but in LA everybody was like more casual and wearing leggings. So I was like, oh, there's kind of like a gap. There was only like real big players at the time, like Sweaty Betty and Lululemon in the UK, and the odd Primark or H&M stores. There wasn't like independent pop-ups other than Gymshark. So yeah, I did my own little bit of research and thought this would be a good opportunity to go into, because I always knew at that level, because there was such a decrease in wages from Liverpool to Blackpool. I was like, okay, if I ever want to earn this amount of money again, the probability of making it in football would be more and more difficult. And I again, at the time, loads of things was like there's certain synergies. Like I read a book called Rich Dad Poor Dad. I'm not sure if you've read it, but pretty famous book, and it speaks about like finances and like financial quadrants and stuff like this, and it just gave me a completely different mentality and outlook on life. So then, yeah, I started the company off the basis of that, and looking at the longevity of a footballer's career. And I'm probably over talking from the initial question, but it then stems onto like the career length of most footballers. And if you're lucky, you probably get to my age now, 31, and you're probably going to be coming to the end of your career. And for the majority of footballers that don't go on to make it at a Premier League level and earn vast amounts of money, I think I released a book recently talking on these topics that almost 3 in 5 Premier League footballers ultimately go bankrupt when they retire from football after 3 years, and it's due to finances. So then, yeah, all of this compiled together, I was like, okay, well, maybe I need to look at life outside of football. Not to say that I was ever giving up, but I kind of needed to have a contingency.
And I'm glad you obviously you touched on the ebook you've written, because I kind of gave that a glance over yesterday. I've seen you promoted it on your social media platforms, and kind of I think it was you were at the start of pre-season coming up. You were basically saying like if you've not got a contract, or the uncertainty that surrounds the game, is that something that not put you off it, but that made it a more strategic and more worthwhile move to kind of stop playing a couple of years ago and think, right, I'm going to, put all my eggs into this basket kind of thing, because, there's like you said, there's a gap in the market, and you'd be able to grow what you've obviously grown your business into to what it is today?
Yeah, I feel like, again, there's a what's the word I'm looking for? There's a misconception with all footballers are millionaires and they live this amazing lifestyle. And for a lot of footballers, they're not. It's the quite opposite. The money is good for a small period of time, but over a period of a lifetime, which is hopefully if you live into your 70s, it's in the grand scheme of things, it's actually not a lot. And then for the majority, you're going to be coming to your end of your career with no real qualification, no real other life skills other than being in that footballing world. And that type of logical thinking was always in my head. I remember being in high school, and when teachers used to say certain things to me, I'm like, well, you're speaking from your own bias and perspective. That doesn't apply to everybody, and each individual is different. And for me, yeah, when it got to 25, and it was a couple of like League One teams that was interested in me, I had a conversation with myself, and I just said, is this where I imagined I wanted to be when I was a kid? When I used to grow up and I used to look at all of the greats, Michael Owen, Beckham's, Ronaldo, that was the era of players that I used to admire. Did I ever aspire to play at League One? And again, this is no disrespect to anybody playing at that level, because to be a professional footballer is one of the most difficult jobs in the world, regardless of the level. But the answer was no. And from that moment, I said, okay, well, if I don't want to do this and it's not making me happy, then I'm not going to continue, because I feel like the vanity metric of, oh, what's happening with you? Hey, do you still play? Or where are you at now? Or I feel like a lot of people stay in the game because it's all they've ever known. And for me, the fear of unknown is a challenge. So I'm going to challenge myself. Again, and that was just my mentality. So yeah, it was something I looked at and thought, well, I need to do something. I didn't earn enough to not ever do anything, but I earned enough to give me a comfortable blanket, to give me a better opportunity than most that want to start a company or take some time away from football and start something new. I never had I had 2 investment properties, which was paid off. So I had no real responsibility, didn't have a family, didn't have no children. So I was like, yeah, this is the best time, because when I'm 31, it's highly probable that I might have a missus and a mortgage and children. And then that's when it's more difficult for people to make decisions. So I feel like it was a very logical decision that I made.
And when did you set the company up then? What year was that?
I registered the company in 2016. And then I don't think we started trading until 2017.
And now at the minute, so where are you based? Are you UK? Are you in Dubai?
I'm actually living in Chelsea. I moved back
Oh,
to
yeah.
the UK in June of last year. But yeah, 2 years prior, I was living in Dubai. But the company is registered in the UK, and my warehouse is in Bolton. So all of my distribution is from Bolton. And then my employees is all remote working.
And just to kind of to wrap up with then, I just kind of take it back to the start then, and obviously when you first got through the doors of Melwoods or Kirby when you were a 15, 16-year-old, what would be your message to yourself now, 16 years later, if you could speak to 15, 16-year-old Nathan and tell him about the journey he was about to embark on?
Jeez, what a question that is. Jeez, what would I tell myself? I would probably say to myself to be more present, because like moments are fleeting, right? And you can never get them back after they've gone. Again, not to be philosophical, but it's a reality. So just to be more present and be more ruthless. I would definitely say be more ruthless, be more selfish. They'd probably be the 2 most things I would say. Be present and be more ruthless. Those are the 2 things that I would say.
Well, thank you very much for that, Nathan. I've taken far more of your time than I wanted to, so I apologise about that. But I really enjoyed that chat. It was really, really great. So thank you very much.
No, I appreciate it, and thanks for reaching out and thinking of me. It's been a long time since I've been at the club, but it's nice to still be thought of occasionally. So yeah, I appreciate the conversation, and wish you well as well in your journey and what you're doing. So I think it's amazing.